That wasn't a alarm.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Connie Moss. I'm the director of the EDD and Educational Leadership Program in the School of Education at Duquesne University. It is my honor to welcome you to the doctoral defense of Luci-Jo DiMaggio. On behalf of the faculty in the Department of Educational Foundations and Leadership in the School of Education and our doctoral program, I thank you for attending. Before I explain what you're about to witness today, it is my honor to introduce Luci-Jo's committee. First, Dr. Gretchen Jenrette, Dean of the School of Education and the Noble J. Dick Endowed Chair in Community Outreach. Second, Dr. Lena D. Distilio, the Associate Vice Chancellor for Community Engagement at the University of Pittsburgh. Hi, Lena.
Hello.
I have to tell everybody, stay right there, Lena. This is a big day for me. Lena is also my doctoral student way back in the day. This is the very first time I've ever had a doctoral student with one of my former doctoral students on the committee. I'm like a grandma.
It's great.
I'm so proud of you, Lena. I love you.
Oh,
All right.
I love this whole committee.
I love you too, Gretchen, just so you know. I want to extend sincere thanks to the faculty of the Department of Foundations and Leadership for their many contributions to Luci-Jo over her 3 years in the program. Thank you as well to Darlene Beck, our program assistant, who has worked tirelessly on behalf of our candidates to make sure the defenses can take place smoothly at distance, and she even figured out how we can sign. So I'm so appreciative. I also extend greetings to Luci-Jo's family and friends who are joining us today. I'd like to briefly share some insights about our doctoral program and the event you will soon witness. One of the core beliefs of the EDD and educational leadership is that socially just leadership is the fusion of the mind, heart, and spirit in the moment of action. The dissertation that Luci-Jo has authored is guided by principles of intellectual discernment, the mind, community engagement, the heart, and social justice, the spirit. Our graduates, as Luci-Jo will demonstrate today, have the intellectual rigor and the practical experience to engage educational challenges with skill and courage. In the presentation that Luci-Jo has prepared for us today, she will describe her study and discuss her findings. Her doctoral defense is not an effort to prove something. Rather, it is a description of her investigation of a complex system. As you listen to her, keep in mind that there is an important difference between something that is complicated and something that is complex. Luci-Jo will help us understand the factors that contribute to transforming the beliefs of students engaged with communities. This is a complex issue and is much more than the sum of its parts. It is beyond complicated. An iPhone, for example, is complicated. It can be deconstructed and each part can be examined for how it functions to reveal the functioning of the entire system. In contrast, complex systems like university programs that foster community engagement and activism present a whole that is much greater than the sum of its parts. It's impossible to take these complex systems apart just to study them. By doing so, you lose key aspects of how the parts work within the system and their relationship to each other. In complex systems, unexpected consequences can rise as the result of the countless possible interactions of its human parts. That's what makes the social sciences so exciting. In just a moment, I will ask Luci-Jo to begin her presentation. When she concludes her presentation, I will invite the committee to ask questions, not to stump or embarrass her, but to lead a scholarly discussion of her work. Once the committee is finished, and if time allows, I will invite others to contribute their questions. When the questioning ends, the committee and I will leave to discuss the defense and come out with our decision. We'll return to this room and announce that decision to all of you. I respectfully remind you now to please turn off your cameras, mute yourself, and for those in the room to remain quiet so that Luci-Jo can present without interruption or distraction. Thank you again for your cooperation, and as the proud chair of Luci-Jo's work, I invite her to begin her presentation.
Okay, that's it, right? Okay, sorry. Welcome, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Moss, and thank you, Dr. Generette and Distilio, for being here, and thank you to my small but mighty pack in the room today for support. I really appreciate not just talking to a camera. Thank you. So the study for my dissertation dealt with approaches to curricular and co-curricular community engagement with college students. A bit about the context. The study was done at Duquesne University, and service has been a part of who we are since our very inception. However, the organizing of that and really the formalizing of that didn't happen until much later. So in the late 80s, we see the formation of some flagship programs out of campus ministry, which is in the Division of Mission Identity, with their alternative spring breaks. Right around that same time, we also have the Division of Student Life forming the Duquesne University Volunteers Office, or the DOVE office. And then in the early 2000s, Academic Affairs creates a position for the coordinator of service learning in its inception there. And so from the beginnings, all of those different divisions are unique, obviously, and so the work was unique, but they all had commonalities. They've all had similarities from the beginning, and they still do today. So the types of community engagement I explored were curricular community engagement, co-curricular community engagement, and a hybrid model of community engagement. Just a note quickly about the terms. There's not consensus in the field of community engagement in higher education on terminology. So if you've read some of this or you're familiar with it and these terms aren't necessarily familiar, this work gets referred to as service learning, community engaged learning, the faith that does justice, volunteer work, service work. I settled in on these particular terms that you see on the slide because I felt they were the most explanatory for the purposes of the study that I wanted to complete. So curricular community engagement is academically rooted, right? So it's associated with a credit-bearing class. Ideally, the community engagement work is associated with the concepts being covered in the class. If you've ever heard the term service learning or community engaged learning, that's curricular community engagement, so housed within the curriculum. Then we have co-curricular community engagement, and this is more of an extracurricular activity. So these are things associated with student groups, maybe service organizations or Greek organizations. It can also be an individual that just on Saturday mornings wants to go to their local food bank and volunteer while they're a college student. You'll hear this referred to a lot as volunteer work or service work. When it's associated with an organization, it's typically housed within student affairs or student life at the institution. And then the hybrid model I looked at is, well, as you can imagine, a hybrid of both of the previous models. So it's got some traits of both. It might be offered as optional for course credit, but you could do the program without. It's certainly voluntary. It's never a mandated part of a particular academic track. And I'll get into that one a little more when I talk about that group. When I was doing my literature review, three themes really emerged as present in the community engagement world in higher ed across curricular and co-curricular arenas. So they were authentic relationship building, shifting the power from the university to the community, and the personal development of the student. So authentic relationship building can be done very high level. It could be board of directors of a community organization and higher administration of a university. But for the purposes of this study, we looked at a very boots on the ground view. We looked at the representatives of the university, in this case, the students, and the relationships that they were forming with the community members that they were encountering in their work. For shifting the power from university to community, power comes in lots of different forms, right? So universities often wield the power of finances in those relationships with communities, but they also wield a lot of power of knowledge. Higher education institutions often consider themselves keepers of knowledge. We're schools after all. But what that can degrade into is this idea that we hold the knowledge. And don't worry, we are here to share the knowledge. So to transfer some of that power is to adopt an asset-based mentality. and to understand that knowledge exists within the community, and we as the university must learn. Not even can't, we must learn from that if we're going to do this work well. And then personal development of the student. So we're an educational institution. Our bread and butter is students, right? So of course, across all the different arenas, people are interested in personal development of the student. What we're particularly interested in for the context of this study is how community engagement influences the development of each student as an individual. So I took those themes and placed them within a framework of belief irritation. So what is it about community engagement that irritates students' beliefs in a way that allows them to abandon their previously held beliefs and change to different ones, right? So particularly, what are those traits, right? What's the magic sauce? What are the ingredients of community engagement that irritate beliefs, particularly towards a social justice mindset? So I took those themes and I took the framework and I built a series of continuums. And don't worry if this is too small to see now. I just wanted to let everybody know that I built the continuums and we're going to address them later on a bigger, clearer slide, and I'm actually going to go through them. The important thing to know now is the themes were acted as macro characteristics, and then there were micro characteristics within each one. And the continuums slid on one end from a helper mentality to the other end of a social justice mentality. And I just want to make mention of those now, but I'm going to address those more thoroughly when we get into the analysis. So, my research question: which programmatic principles of community engagement have a higher potential to irritate the beliefs of college students that they hold regarding their own power, privilege, and understanding of social justice? Again, what are the magic ingredients here? How can we irritate beliefs, not just to change beliefs, but to change them toward a social justice mindset? You can create an agent of change, but if the change is negative, we may have failed at our jobs. So we're looking to create agents of social justice. The study I did was qualitative in nature. I used 2 instruments, and I looked at 3 different groups: one curricular, one co-curricular, and a hybrid model. And so for each grouping, 3 students received instrument 1, and that was an open-ended questionnaire. It asked questions around what was challenging about their community engagement work, what was impactful about that work. It also asked them to gauge their own development as they perceived it, so self-perceived growth and development through their community engagement experiences. Then for instrument 2, that went to the advisor or instructor of each program, and it was also an open-ended questionnaire, but it asked questions more around general information about the group. What was the preparation of the group before they went into their community engagement experience? Was there reflection used? Was it critical? Was it formal, informal? Those types of questions. So now we're getting to the fun stuff. This program did turn me into a data nerd that I never thought would happen. I never thought I would be an academic nerd, and I did. It's great. So the first group I looked at was Gamma Sigma Sigma. Gamma Sig for short is how we often refer to them on campus. And this was the co-curricular example. They are a service sorority on campus. They're housed, like all of our student organizations, in the Division of Student Life. And they provide both ongoing and one-time service events for students. So that is to say, they provide some ongoing experiences where a student can engage with a particular community partner on a regular basis, maybe monthly or bi-weekly, but they also do a lot of one-time events. And as reported by their advisor, most of the students choose the one-time events. You go, you engage with a partner for a one-time thing, you come back, the next time you engage, it's a different partner, different event, different theme, different everything. The membership really varies, so the length of time varies, because students can join this organization anytime between their freshman and senior year. However, once they're a part of the organization, they typically engage about 3 to 5 times a year with the community. There is no formal preparation offered from the organization to students before they go out into community. However, sometimes the partner will offer some sort of orientation when they get there. That's not really guaranteed, though, according to the advisor. And there's not formal or informal reflection as a part of this group. So what the data showed for this group was a really, I thought, fascinating paradox. Again, little nerd there, but a fascinating paradox, I felt, of altruism and egocentrism. So we had these students that they had very obviously these big hearts. They were driven by good intentions. They wanted to be altruistic. They wanted to help. But it was very me-centered. Anytime they talked about the community, they talked about the community as an entity that they were helping, as a thing to be served. and they never really talked about it as an independent entity, if that makes sense. So even their self-perceived transformation was about becoming more altruistic. Their transformation, as they perceived it, was about becoming better helpers. They could help more people in more ways. Now, altruism on the surface absolutely is great, right? It's not inherently negative. However, altruism on its own, when we're talking about college students and community engagement, really works antithetically to an asset-based mentality, right? So if I only perceive myself as helper and I only perceive you all as needing help, then clearly I have the power and I have the assets. You don't. That's why I need to help you, right? So it just kind of compounded that idea. The second group I looked at was a clinical reasoning 1 and 2 class. So this was my example of a curricular community engagement model. Remember, this is the academically rooted one. So this is a course that's mandatory for all occupational therapy majors here in their 4th year. They take it over 2 semesters. Their instructor reported that they serve for about 20 weeks. So on an academic calendar, what that looks like for them is they start about halfway through the fall semester, and they serve until about halfway through the spring semester for about 2 to 3 hours a week. They do serve with the same partner throughout their experience. It does involve preparation both before they get to the partner and throughout around things like community-based practice of occupational therapy, how they engage with groups, how to understand different demographics they're going to be working with, and how to communicate across cultural barriers. This program also includes critical reflection mandated by the instructor. So the students, to complete the class, have to do the critical reflection pieces. They also do some informal reflection as well, both in and outside of class. The instructor reported that, and the students actually echoed that as well. So the data for this group looked quite a bit different from the Gamma Sig group. They were really steeped in relationships. They talked a lot about collaboration and this language that really spoke of authentic relationships. They valued this idea of getting to know the people that they were working with just as human beings, right? They wanted to build that relationship that you get from time spent and stories shared with one another. They talked about empowerment. They had a lot of language that echoed equitable relationships as well. They were the only group that talked about co-creating anything, and they used that word, and I thought that was really, really interesting. Because if you're going to co-create something together, I'm bringing something and you're bringing something, and we're creating something entirely new. I didn't come with my solution and then listen to yours, right? And the same goes of the opposite. We literally created something together, and that is at the heart of an equitable relationship, is that idea of co-creation. So they also talked a lot about empowering the community as well within that. That the community wasn't necessarily something to be helped, although they did refer to it very often as a separate entity, but they talked about how their work could be sustainable and how they could empower the community after they were gone. The last group I looked at was the community engagement scholars, and this is the hybrid model I talked about. So this is a voluntary program. Students can sign up for it. It has an option for course credit, but students can do the entire program and not have any course credit associated with it, but they still have to fulfill all the requirements of the program. And it's actually a co-owned program between academic affairs and mission and identity. And so it's really got a foot in both worlds, which I think really leads to it being a unique program. I disclosed this in my study. I'll disclose it now. I am the instructor and program manager for that program. But I did fill out the same open-ended questionnaire as my peers did, just for consistency's sake. So the students in that program, they work over 2 semesters, a fall and then a spring semester. They serve about 100 hours per semester, which shakes out to be about 7 to 8 hours a week. So a little longer than the previous group, the clinical reasoning group. Students do stay with the same partner for the entire length of the experience. They do have preparation, both before they start serving and throughout that year they're serving. They get overviews on concepts such as intersectionality, racial power and privilege, charity and justice, all sorts of different things. Nonviolent social change is a piece of that as well. And then it includes both formal and informal reflection. That is to say, we do some informal reflecting within the context of our seminars, but the students have mandated critical reflection pieces that they have to do regardless of whether they're taking it for credit or not as a part of the program. So the data from the community engagement scholars resonated a little bit with the previous one with the clinical reasoning, but was a bit different as well. So we still saw those themes of authentic relationship building, right? These students really valued listening and getting to know their partners as people. the people they worked alongside at their agencies, and also the people with whom they were interacting within the community that the agency served, right? So what made this group a little bit different was they were the only group that really came from a social change approach. They talked about root causes. They talked about systemic change. When they talked about problems they were facing, throughout their experience, they began to view them as sort of a symptom of the disease. But they were very interested not just in the symptom, but what's the disease? How do I pull back and get a big picture view of this, right? Their language was really around the systems at play there. So just a quick overview, and so you can see it all in one place. The groups and the themes, right? We have Gamma Sigma Sigma. That was our co-curricular group. They had themes of altruism and egocentrism, and their perceived transformation was towards being a better helper. Then we have clinical reasoning. That's the class. That's the academically rooted one. They were really steeped in this idea of equitable relationships, which speaks to power distribution, and also authentic relationships. And then we have the community engagement scholars. That's the hybrid model. They also talked about authentic relationships, but really had a sense of a social change approach. So now's where it gets really fun. We are back to our continuums. So I'm hoping in Zoom land you can see these. I know for those in the room, they're a little bit tough, but if you have Zoom up at the same time, you can look. So we can see one side of the continuum, social justice mindset. The other side is this idea of a helper mindset. And what I did was I took the data and I placed each grouping on each individual continuum. And I'd like to take a second to go through those. So for authentic relationship building, the first continuum was this idea of working with. So towards a social justice mindset, it's that idea of quite simply working with a community as partners in an equitable relationship, right? When we have the clinical reasoning, that's the CR1 and 2 you'll see listed, and the community engagement scholars listed as CES on the continuum, more towards the social justice mindset piece. We have Gamma Sig listed on the continuums as GSS, more towards serving at, on, or for a community. So that idea of serving at is the idea of showing up and having the solutions. Again, towards that helper mentality. The second continuum there is about being open to transformational relationships. And really, all three groups were more towards the social justice mindset of the continuum on this. Again, we have clinical reasoning really towards the top there, and then the CES program, and then the Gamma Sig a little more towards transactional relationships, but they did have, one or two of the individuals did have some language in there around wanting to move toward a richer relationship. So then we move down to the continuums for power shift, right? For shifting the power from the university to the community. The first one is around asset-based thinking. We have the community engagement scholars way up towards social justice mindset, closely followed by the clinical reasoning class. That's an asset-based approach, understanding that the community has the knowledge it needs to solve problems, right? Towards the other end, we have that deficit-based approach. And that's really, I think, a big trait of the helper mindset, that idea that you have the answers and you at the least have more of the answers than the person you are serving or you are helping. The next continuum under power is that idea of co-creation of knowledge. And so the clinical reasoning class really blew this one out of the water. They were way higher up, with CES not too far behind. Again, we have GSS more towards the helper mindset of the continuum. It's more about the university being the house of knowledge, the producer of the knowledge that is needed here. And then the last set of continuums we have fall under the personal development of the student, as it was self-described by the students, right? So that first one is the presence of critical reflection. Within the responses, both the CES students and the clinical reasoning students valued their reflection. They were they thought that was a very important part of their experience. The Gamma Sig students did not have reflection, but also didn't think it was important. They didn't think it was a really good use of their time, given the pressed time of a college student. And then the last one we have there is the idea of social justice approach. So the community engagement scholars, that was really a big theme for them. And then not too far behind, there were certainly themes from the clinical reasoning group. That's that more systemic approach. And then towards the helper mindset, we have more of a hit and run episodic charity approach, where the Gamma Sig students sent. So I just want to say one thing about the continuums before I go any further. Please do not see this as good and bad, right? It's a continuum. Continuums in my head are things you slide on, right? You go up, you go down. So I don't think any one group on this point is fixed, and that's really important when we get to the conclusions. I think we can look at this and you can see some really obvious themes, even if you can't see the small type, right? We have the community engagement scholars and the clinical reasoning group on the social justice mindset on every single one. We have the Gamma Sigma Sigma group, that co-curricular group, on the helper mindset on just about every one except the relationships. They got placed a little bit higher. So I feel like this begs the question, why? Because those programs were not exactly alike, the two that got placed in the social justice mindset. And just to kind of highlight the similarities and differences, we have this chart of the key elements of the program. So we know Gamma Sigma Sigma was different. We can see on the continuum, they were in a different place. But why were the clinical reasoning and the community engagement scholars programs both towards social justice mindset? We know they're different. One's a curricular, one's a hybrid model, right? We know the length of time was very different. Actually, in fairness, wildly different. 2 to 3 hours a week for 20 weeks versus 7 to 8 hours a week for 40 weeks. That's a big difference. So you can't say that time spent in the community is the key here. But when we go to the last two columns, it gets really interesting. We have educational components and reflective components. And here's where I think the most stark contrast is. The educational components were not a part of what Gamma Sig does formally within their organization at all. Sometimes the community partners have an orientation when they get there. And there were no reflective components. And while the advisor said that they encouraged them, she also admitted that they didn't really do them. And the students themselves said this was not a thing they necessarily wanted or valued. The clinical reasoning and the community engagement the community engagement scholars programs were very different. They had really, really rich educational components that not only happened before the work started, but happened throughout. Same thing with the reflection. They had critical reflection pieces and informal reflection pieces all throughout, including pre and post reflections, right? At the very beginning and end, but really woven throughout the entire program. I'm sorry, I have to get a drink really quick. Okay, so I would say then that all of that information could be used to argue that reflection and educational components might be our secret ingredients, or at least a part of the magic sauce that we want to use for this, okay? I think it could be argued that when we don't have those, we see what happens at Gamma Sig. We didn't irritate beliefs. We compounded beliefs, right? They thought of themselves as helpers coming in, and what their experience did was make them think of themselves as better helpers. Again, that's not belief irritation, that's compounding belief. They didn't abandon their initial beliefs at all. However, in the community engagement program, the community engagement scholars program and the clinical reasoning class, we did irritate belief in a way that allowed them to start to abandon the initial ideas and beliefs they came into the program with, or they came into the class with, right? So why? Well, I would argue that reflection, particularly critical reflection, allows for an incredibly, incredibly important space for processing. This study didn't show that, but from my experience, for me, this is a deal breaker when you do this work. If you don't allow students the space to process this and a framework they can work off of to process this, they lose so much. This might be the first time a student is in the room working with a disabled person. It might be the first time they have to run programming for a group of elderly. They might be the first time they are a white student in a community of color. All of this creates experiential dissonance. They have to have a space to process that. And when we provide that, we see that shift more towards the social justice mindset. Education is not all that different when we're introducing these new concepts, or even if they are concepts the students had and we are pressing them to think about them in new ways. Again, it challenges those previously held beliefs. So, in conclusion, just to sort of tie things up, we had, remember, that co-curricular program that seemed to be further on the continuum towards helper mindset than towards social justice mindset. Remember what I said about continuums being fluid. We should be able to slide. I do not think that this study shows that co-curricular community engagement is stuck down here towards the helper mindset. In fact, I think it shows the opposite. I think that it shows that we can irritate belief in community engagement with college students regardless of the context. I think that that can happen in curricular and co-curricular spaces by the addition of critical reflection with some informal reflection as well as educational components. Is it easier in a curricular space? Sure, because you have the classroom and you can say you're going to be graded on this. However, we saw in a hybrid model, and when we have kids that do not take this for credit, they still immerse themselves in those components and then they value them. And we irritated beliefs in the direction we wanted to, right? We pushed them more toward a social justice mindset. So I definitely think that the study shows we can have meaningful, rich community engagement experiences regardless of whether they exist in academic affairs, student affairs, or mission identity. It's about the components that we use, not the house the community engagement lives in. And I think that's all. I can skip to the questions. I don't know if there's a lag.
Thank you, Luci-Jo. Thank you, Luci-Jo. I invite everyone to turn on their cameras. I invite Luci-Jo to take a seat if you'd like to, relax a little bit. You did an exceptional job. It was quite a complex study. I know that you have, at the end of this study, some suggestions and even a curricular sort of capsule curriculum that you would use, maybe a workshop kind of approach. Do you want to talk about that a little bit before we start the questioning? Because I think that was an important aspect of your study.
Sure. One of the suggestions in my conclusions that I listed was a workshop model for providing some of this information to college students doing work in co-curricular arenas. And it was a bit of a train-the-trainer model where we would send student leaders and help them to understand how they could better guide the groups that they lead by showing them, here's some things that really maybe everyone should know about community engagement, right? We should know about the community that we are entering into as guests, and we should view ourselves as guests and not saviors, right? We should know a little bit about the history and the culture and the demographic that you're going to be working with, the community agency, if it's with an agency, and their mission, and lay that out so they're able to then share that with their participants. Then I took a section where we laid out for student leaders a very easy critical reflection model. It's called the DEAL model. It's one of the easiest models of critical reflection out there. And we walk them through how to have students not just talk about their experiences, but identify learning that happened, and then identify how they're processing that learning and what they're going to do with that learning. Another model that can be used there is a from through to model, where you're literally walking through students what just happened and having them listen to themselves, really, like it's you write and then they read what they wrote along the way to really understand how they're processing that. So it was a workshop created to allow student leaders to have the tools to do this with their student organizations, knowing that in a perfect world, every single club advisor would be trained to do this, right? Anybody that is a part of an organization that does service of any sort would be trained to do this. However, we know that's not possible, at least tomorrow. If I stay here long enough, maybe. But at least tomorrow, we know that's not possible, and it felt like a really important starting point to start with the student leaders. So does that answer your question, Dr. Moss?
Yes, I mean, it really wasn't my question yet.
Right.
It answered my suggestion that you share that, because I thought that was such a wonderful part of your study, and the part that really shows the difference between leadership in the moment of action. That this dissertation is not just about pontificating on a subject, but actually being able to roll up your sleeves and do the work. And I found it particularly important that what you're suggesting is to put power into the hands of student leaders who are going to do this kind of, do the work themselves, right? To help them do it in better ways. And I really loved that part of this dissertation. I wanted to make sure that everyone got a chance to hear it, because I know they haven't all gotten a chance to read it yet. So Luci-Jo has defended for me just about every time we've spoken, every time we've re-edited and reorganized and filled in gaps. So I'm going to ask my questions last, and I'm going to give the honor of the first round of questions to the committee. So Dr. Distilio, Dr. Jenrette, dealer's choice. Who would like to go first?
I'd like to yield to Dean General.
I have to say, Lena, you're just quicker to that unmute button there. So thank you so much, Luci-Jo, for all of your excellent work. It has been a pleasure to read this and to experience your process with you, to see how you came to this particular question and to this particular important work. I can remember on several occasions you trying to get to what is it that I really want to do, what is really my work, and I think you landed squarely in the middle of your work here. So thank you for that. I'm interested in how you're thinking about moving the theory to practice for the students, right? And so, because I think it's really clear in your own work that you've taken these theories and lifted them up and put them squarely in how you've designed your own curriculum to impact what's happening on this campus as it relates to community engagement. And that's awesome. And I'm wondering how you would articulate that being modeled and made transparent to the students over in these different spaces. So one of the things that really struck me in your work is that when you look at that curriculum, it's really moved from individual work to systemic work, right? And there are really some philosophical differences there, right? So whether or not relationships are about individuals and our individual relationship, or whether or not relationships are about the larger community, and so there are lots of ways in which people can slice and dice this. But I'm really interested in how you understand in each of those groups how they're talking about their beliefs and practice in the moment. So not just sort of, oh, I believe in relationships and I want to help, but really sort of how does that actualize? Because I think the pieces that get lost in this, even when we're moving from helping to where we're moving to, you know, actual social justice work, the people's mindsets and beliefs and theories are one thing. It's when they're actually in practice and doing the work, right? And so I'm curious about how you understand that that part of the process for the students.
Within, just for clarification, within the context of the study, or applying this in my work moving forward?
Well, I think it would be a both and for me. So when you look at it from the studies piece, like how are you thinking about specifically for the students in their practice, and then thinking about it for your work moving forward, for where you want the students to go?
So I think, if I'm hearing you correctly, how, you know, when we talk about the social change approach in particular, you're right, that's a big, heady philosophical thing. And I don't think that can be jumped to necessarily in workshop one. I don't. When we're talking about putting it into practice, right? So, you know, I think there's something to be said for the fact that the two groups that got there had ongoing training. If this was, we don't open with social justice change approach, at least in the community engagement scholars, we get there, but that's maybe session 3 or 4 that we get there. So to put that into practice and what that looks like, again, I don't think it's impossible. I think at worst it's time consuming. And I think that there has to be a piece where this is mandated, at least for student leaders. And I know that there's an argument to be made that says, but we really have to have students that want to be there, and that's true. However, it's a university, and we force students to be in rooms to learn things all the time. All the time, we hold things over their head to force them to be in rooms. And so when we're talking about student leaders in particular, I do think, sure, you maybe offer it out as a incentivize something at first, maybe a certificate program, not even one that goes in our transcripts. We have all sorts of certificates within the student life realm, student-facing realm, that you get by completing programs. For instance, we have one here called the Spirit Leaders Program. That is an 8-session program that students participate in over the course of 1 year, that then they get a little certificate for their portfolio that says student leader now, or spirit leader rather. In that context, then I think we start to walk students toward that idea of social change, because you can't just teach that. I can't put that in the booklet. And I don't know if anybody else can either without discussion. And that's actually, I'm really glad you asked that because it brings up a good point that I do not think education and reflection can be separated. I don't think you can just have this info on a website and have a kid read it and hope for the best. They absolutely have to have space to process this. And you have to have them in a space where their peers are challenging their beliefs as well. You have to have kids in spaces where they're disagreeing with each other, where they're saying, I don't believe that's what authentic relationships is. I do believe it's this. I believe it's up here. I believe it's down here. And they might both be right for their own context. But I do believe that there are structures that can be utilized or put in place to provide that multi-touch point, right? Where students are getting this at a little bit of a time and not just show up for your social change approach workshop. I hope I answered what you were asking.
Yeah. I think you did. I think so. The examples you gave me at the beginning about certificate and all these different things really, I think, speak to the types of systemic integration that needs to happen in order for people to see the value of it. Because I think that's important, because we could have all of these students individually being impacted in positive ways in their mindsets even, but then if our system doesn't change, then that you know, we got to have both and I think the other thing that you mentioned, Luci-Jo, and I wanted to this goes into my next question, is you named some things that are really important for there to be in there. So you talked about, you know, it takes time, it has to be a part of our values, the productivity, like all of these things are part of when we talk about systemic change. What role, if any, do you think the age of these students play in your conclusion?
If you're asking me if I'd rather work with 40-year-olds or college kids, is I don't even resonate well with a post 25-year-old audience. But even if I did, you know, I don't have enough expertise specifically on irritation of beliefs, particularly with, you know, middle-aged folks like myself. But if I had to guess, the more set your beliefs are, the harder they are to shift, right? And so I think for me, of course, I believe this because I've chosen to spend my entire life with college students, but I think 18 to 22 is the sweet spot, right? You are old enough to process on your own. You've gotten a little bit away from the beliefs you grew up with, whether that was in your house or your town or your family. You're open to new experiences, or you would not have probably come to a university. You maybe would have just stayed where you were. Sometimes we're lucky enough to have kids pretty far from home. And so they are kind of, it's almost that toddler level stuff, right? Like they are sucking this up. And if you give them permission to say, I don't agree with that, it's like magic happens. Because for the first time, some of these kids have the permission to say that in a classroom context, even in a group context. You know, these are kids that, you know, I've heard kids a million times say, college kids say, I actually disagree completely with my family and all of their feelings on this, but I would have never in my life said that because it would have just not gone well at my kitchen table, or it would have been flat out dangerous to say, right? It's our first time doing this. So I do think that college students are the sweet spot there. And just, I was thinking of something because you said systemic change and how much of that is a part of the system changing as opposed to what maybe individual acts are doing. I do think the system is slowly changing here. I think we're getting there. I just realized, if you remember that first slide, it said 2005 coordinator of service learning. If you need proof, in the room with me right now is the first coordinator of service learning and also the current associate vice president of community engagement. That's a different job now. That's a different job than it was 15 years ago. And there are units, there are people underneath that position now. And I get a dotted reporting line there for the first time ever. We have community engagement organized in a cohesive unit. So I do think systemic change is incredibly important. And I also think bit by baby bit, if you stay here long enough, it's getting there.
Okay, fantastic. I'm good. I thank you for your work. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Jarrett. Dr. DeStilio?
Yes. Luci-Jo.
Yes,
This has
ma'am.
been exciting. It has been so exciting to watch the whole process. Every desperately early Sunday morning text where you read something that has just like put you on fire. Every time we talked and you were just angry at with somebody else wrote. And here's why that was so really beautiful. You and I had the opportunity to work together as practitioners next to each other for a really long time. And I think for a long time, Luci-Jo, you've been an expert in your practice. You were reticent to take the step toward being a scholar. And as soon as you stepped into the water, you like swam like an Olympic swimmer, like Noah. And so that's been really fun, right? Because I think the point here is to really sort of pull together as a scholar practitioner. So I wanted to offer that because I think it's really a treasure to be part of. So I think one of the things you've done really nicely, you know, I don't know if you articulated it exactly like this in the work, but I think you've really beautifully laid out that the role of reflection and community engagement, that's at least in the service of social justice, is to irritate the beliefs of our students about their roles in relationship to our broader community. Right. And I noticed as you were walking through the findings that the three groups of students really differed in their conception of communities and people in those communities. So, you know, in one instance, there was this idea that people that they were working with, they saw them as people, they saw them as persons, they saw them as free of themselves, right? Independent of themselves, the student. It was these people exist, have expertise, we are co-creating, right? In another instance, a group of students saw again people as people, independent of the student, and really thoughtful about the ways that the organization played into social change. And of course, the third group, in my opinion, really looked at didn't actually see that there was an objectification, right? Those individuals exist for me to help. Yeah. So the self-recognition. Right? So my question is this, right? Did you ask the program facilitators about any preparation or framework that they were offering to the students in advance of the work that gave a context? In other words, did the students just bring that in unchallenged, or was there some kind of a frame given the students about who and what community is?
So I don't know if I asked that specific question, but it was offered in two cases as information. The Gamma Sig group did not offer it, and so I'm assuming it was not present given other things. But I know within the clinical reasoning group, the class, and within the community engagement scholars group, we do talk about community-based. Sorry, I'm going to reference the name of the person. When the faculty member that instructs the clinical reasoning class, when she talks about community-based practices, she talks about what is community, right? That's a piece of that. And I think that it's safe to say, having been in on that class, I present in those classes sometimes, it is not as only an external entity to be held. And I know for certain within the Community Engagement Scholars Program, we talk a lot about the community as a place where you are going to go as a learner, right? You are not here to teach anything. You are here to learn and build relationships. I don't know if I'm getting at what you're asking, but you know, there is definitely a context built in two of those, and the two that were more towards the social justice mindset on what is a community, and it's not just a geographic location. In fact, I know this is true because I do this presentation, the clinical reasoning course, and I teach it obviously in the Community Engagement Scholars Program, that we talk a lot about serving at, in, on, and for community, and working with the community. When you're serving at, in, on, and for an anything, they're there and you're here. They are separate in a way that is not indicative of relationship. But when you're working with a community, it's like the linchpin that starts to balance power, that starts to bring in that understanding human to human, but also I genuinely believe that impacts that systemic approach, right? I think it's really hard for students to think about systems, and this speaks to Gretchen's question to how do you get to the systems, right, that social justice approach, without first knowing humans as humans and valuing their stories. If I don't value your story, how am I ever going to value that you bring knowledge to the table, right? I think that's something inherent to this process. That answer you?
Yeah, it did. It did. And I was also noting, as you were talking us through sort of your recognition that the clinical reasoning class got at a co-creation outcome, at least a mindset.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, what would you take from clinical reasoning into the scholars program, if that's a desirable outcome for scholars?
I think that if I had to put my finger on that, it's got to be something to do with the fact that they talk a lot about patient-centered care and occupational therapy in that class, and the students talked about that in their questionnaire, that idea of patient-centered care, that they were going to develop what was going to be done together, I think with the community engagement scholars, they actually have it hammered into them so much that they're learners. They're not there to teach, that almost slips. They have to actually work harder to get to the co-creation of knowledge, and that would be on the instructor, which is me. To look at that. But I saw that and I thought that was so interesting because I wanted the scholars to be there, but they really weren't. And I think it's because they are almost over flipping the continuum, or the relationship, the power relationship. And I'm okay with that on certain aspects, but it definitely does not get the students that idea of co-creation of knowledge, which we know is so important. So thank you for asking. That was a really interesting piece of the study and just of my work with both of those groups.
Thank you.
Anybody?
Oh, hi, Lucy
Just
Jo.
my run.
So there's a lot about your dissertation that intrigues me, and I've learned so much just reading it, and how deeply you dove into each of those concepts in your literature review. So I'm saying this because a lot of the people in the audience today are in their first and second years of the program. And so this is a learning experience for them, as well as a chance for you to unpack your study. I wanted to ask you a question that you brought it forward, and you said, students need both the space and the framework to reflect. Space is easy to understand. Wait, excuse me. Sorry. So space is easy to understand. You put people together, they can talk. I challenge you, you challenge me. We're doing the work, we're out there. Don't we feel good about ourselves? But I think the idea of framework is probably even more important, because I've been involved in a lot of work that calls for reflection. And to me, they're just asking people to reminisce. What did you do? How did you feel? So your work takes it beyond that. It takes it beyond just providing a safe space and providing, a chance for them to reflect or reminisce. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean by critical reflection, and what is the essence of that kind of reflection that can irritate belief? Because the word critical reflection is so ubiquitous now. Who isn't critically reflecting? And so I'm really interested in your insights about what's wrong.
No, I'm laughing. Yes, like you're right. Everybody uses that term.
It is. We're going to critically reflect, and we let them reflect, they journal, and those kind of things to me can also be techniques. And if you know me, you know that I continue to say, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So a strategy of journaling and discussing, don't often interest me at all. And what I hear you talking about is the ways to promote cultures where belief is irritated through a certain kind of reflection. And I'd like you to talk about that in particular.
Sure. So yes, critical reflection is a term that gets thrown around a lot. And I think it's one of those terms that people maybe like to say it because it sounds better than reflection. Although, just to be clear, in this particular study, both groups listed both, right? But I think I called it formal and informal, but it was really critical reflection and more just sort of general reflection, let's call it, for the sake of this study. So I didn't necessarily tease that apart in this study. But as far as the importance of both space and structure, critical reflection, I think, has to be at its core challenging. If you're just asking someone to write what they feel. So I work best in examples. So let's say, and Newbie is in the room, and we work together on the Community Engagement Scholars Program. So we can very easily pull one, and we say something in one of our conversations on racial power, reflect on your understanding of racial power and privilege. And someone writes in their journal, because we said just journal on this, right? Just journal on racial privilege. And what they write is, I understand racial privilege as a white person, but I also understand I really don't have it because I grew up poor. And I also am a part of other minorities as being a female and being a part of the gay community, that those negate my racial privilege. And so I don't actually have any racial privilege. Thank you very much. Now, if we left it at that and said, thank you for your reflection, that I think speaks exactly to what you're saying about that is not irritating belief. That's actually compounding belief, right? An example of how you make that a critical reflection is asking someone, and I really think it's two-part. I don't think necessarily critical reflection happens in a different question. Let me be clear. That's a starting point, but I don't think it can happen like that in a vacuum. It has to be, for me, it has to be more of a dialogue, a conversation. So let's ask the question to reflect on your racial privilege and also challenge yourself, particularly around how race is a more weighted privilege than, say, other privileges and disadvantages. For example, socioeconomic status, English is a first language, and being a part of a dominant religion, right? So you give specifics, but then you have, even still, I will tell you 100%, that student might still say those things. And so it has to enter into a challenging conversation. Somebody has to say the words. Sally Mae, right, making up, Sally, we should probably think about that and talk about that, because I would argue that doesn't actually negate racial privilege. Racial privilege is racial privilege. It doesn't get negated, right? It's not like, oh, but I have these other disadvantages, so I'm not white anymore, right? That's not how that works. And this typically, I'm saying conversation, but often ends in an argument, right? We often, newbie will tell you, we have students cry as a part of class saying, I just don't understand. I'm trying so hard. And we're like, yes, I know, change is hard. And it's funny because really I should reframe that as belief irritation is hard. It's hard to let go of those concepts that we have held so dearly all this time, of thinking that in this example, we're not privileged, right? So I think to your point of what makes the difference, what is the structure is not necessarily a different question. Trying to find the right journal question, from my perspective, helps, but is not the deal breaker. Anybody who's asking their students for reflection and not reading them and commenting and expecting emails back, which I do on the comments, I think that could be argued that's not necessarily critical reflection. That's having students type something out so you can say they type things. So does that answer your question a little more on structure and the importance of the conversation?
It does, Luci-Jo, because the idea here is that the first part that's important in order to irritate a belief is to reveal it.
Right.
And so, you know, the words that you use are so important, that beliefs have to be revealed and then challenged. You know, so it's not enough to say, I have white privilege. Okay, I can learn to parrot that. I can teach a parrot to say that,
Right.
correct? But this
Right.
idea of discussion where people are safe but uncomfortable. So it's not enough just to be safe. You have to be uncomfortable. You have to look at something and say, this doesn't make sense to me anymore. The fact that it doesn't make sense to you and it doesn't make sense to me isn't important. It has to not make sense to that person. And so that's a delicate balance of getting people there. And what I really appreciated at the end of your work was that you offered this general structure and a framework for students, because we can't control all of it. And like you demonstrated with a Gamma Sigma Sigma group, they're going to do it. You know, our sorority is going to do community work. So they're going to do it. We need to help them in ways that might not be perfect, but may take them further along that continuum. And I really appreciated that. You know, it takes a real leader to be able to take that kind of deep expertise that you have, those kinds of knowledge bases that you have, and translate them into things that people can understand. You know, the university is full of people who understand theories and who have big words, but it takes a real leader in action to translate that into words that students can understand so that they can begin their journey. And I really appreciated that about what you do. So I applaud you for that. I really don't have any other questions. As I said, I've been questioning Luci-Jo now for many, many weeks and months. And I'm always satisfied with her responses. And so if I could just ask you for one favor, and that would be, since we have a room full of people along a continuum of their own journey, I'd like to bring to the attention the people in the doctoral program who have joined us today, that Dr. Distilio is a graduate of our program. She's a person that was in our doctoral program, who has gone on to do important work, both practically and theoretically. And she's pushed the boundaries of her field. While at Duquesne, Dr. Distilio was one of the first people to win the Distinguished Dissertation Award for her work. And that is because our dissertations are so high quality and rigorous and complex. And the fact that she's sitting now on not yet, Luci-Jo's committee to offer her expertise, because she is a world expert in this field and has been recognized as such. But here's what I'd like you to do, Luci-Jo, if you just take a minute. I know how being part of it and being along on the ride of your struggles along the way. And there were many times when it was like, I don't want to write anymore. What's with this literature review? Leave me alone, woman. I'd like you to talk a little bit about that moment, because I felt it, you felt it, we were together when things flipped for you and you were like, I get it now. I get it. I can do this. I know exactly what to do. Because before, the conversation was, I don't know what this is about. I don't know if I have the right stuff. I don't even know how to organize this. If you could just take a minute, because I think for people who have taken time to come here and listen to you in their first or second year of the program, what advice would you give them, and how can you describe that moment when your literature review becomes the thing that just drives you forward and all that work is worth it?
Wow, okay. That's not a small question. I definitely remember almost quitting a couple of times and arguing with Connie a couple of times. And I think my husband's on the call now, so he will remember 2 times that I really tried to quit. And he was like, nope, sit down, not quitting, let's talk.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Jason is right. I think the beginnings of it, and Lena said this to me, everybody on my committee, and I think every professor we had said this to me multiple times, and anybody I know that's gone through a doctorate, that if you're not doing something you love as far as the research goes, it will be the most painstaking, arduous, horrible, walking through wet, drying cement like the kid with the horse in the never-ending story awful to try to get through, right? But if you love what you're reading, it's a game changer. I think that was the first big thing, was getting into it. First I was like, this is vaguely related, this is vaguely related. And then it was weird. I actually just started searching things a little differently. It was actually Dr. Distilio said, why don't you go raid some CVs? I think there's something wrong with your search engine. And that was it. And I started finding this stuff that was like, this is speaking to exactly the work that I want to do. This is fantastic. So I think getting really excited about it helped. But then this is the moment Dr. Moss was talking about. I hit another wall where I was like, I have all of these pages of information. I have no idea what to do with it. I don't know what it means, and I don't know how to relate it to a study that would be in any way important. And for me, it really was that, Dr. Moss, I remember, it was the practical creation of those continuums where I was like, people can slide. They're not stuck. Like, we want to show that they're here, but we can move them, and you can backslide. So I think what I laid, it was a visual thing for me. I remember just time and time again, Dr. Olson saying, you need visuals, but, you know, landing on the continuum and figuring out that I could take that stuff from the literature review and actually make it meaningful to the study, that it wasn't just, I wrote this literature review and I was gonna do this study. And I remember telling Dr. Moss, and I was like, and then I have to cram the literature review in there, right? She was like, no, that is not a good approach. You don't want to do that. But it was so much better after I was just drawing on pieces of paper arrows, right? This is where we have kids, this is where we want to get them. This is where we have kids for this is where we want to get them. For me was a big deal. So anyway, yeah, if you're out there still doing your work and you have faculty members that keep saying provide visuals, you should probably sketch on some napkins because it helps. That was a real life thing that happened.
Thank you.
Did the internet just freeze?
She went off.
Oh, there she is.
Mhm. All right, so why don't we open this up for 10 minutes? I'll keep the time. If you want to turn on your cameras and your microphones, if someone has a question for Luci-Jo, we'll take 10 minutes from the attendees. Or if anyone has something they'd like to say.
I'll give a comment.
Hit me with it.
Okay, comment.
Yeah, can we get
Yes.
Nikki has a comment.
So, child, you want her to care for him. Okay.
Let's talk.
You did a great job. I love this. I'm so glad I got to witness like your whole start to finish.
Nubia, can you speak up, please?
She's in the room, Dr. McCallum.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Or keep it on and come up further. Keep it on and come up close to the microphone. Why don't you do that?
Keep your mask on. She's pregnant.
Yeah.
Just come up here.
You good?
Yeah.
Okay. Just like a comment, I think you did a great job. I wanted to talk more about what you think the curriculum would look like, because for CDS, like we do, it's very intentional, right? And we talk about specific things in the community that they will witness.
Right.
So what do you think on a larger scale universities can do to implement that? Like, because education is a requirement for community engagement. So what do you think that would look like on a larger scale?
Right. So are you saying how we talk specifically about we have a finite amount of agencies in the community engagement program.
Exactly.
Okay, get apart.
Okay. So, you tell me if I'm off base, but we speak, like this morning, we were speaking specifically of the 2 environmental agencies, specifically about the 1 community that students work in. And how do we scale that up to like Georgetown that doesn't exist in Pittsburgh and it's a completely different university?
Yeah.
I think if you look at the basis of the curriculum, we make it specific, but I think that themes could be found, one that would resonate across borders, just like the themes arose out of the literature review, right? I think, in fact, you should talk about those 3 themes with the least power redistribution and authentic relationships, to be sure. And I think there are things that resonate on a larger level that can be discussed, like nonviolent social change today and what that looks like, or the push and pull, the dynamic tension between charity and justice, and those sorts of things. And then, I think if I had to sit down and write a curriculum that had to go to other universities, I would write in a section that says, listen, you have to get out. If you don't know your communities yet, you have to know them, because you have to have community-specific stuff in here. It's why I don't think we could put every single student leader in a room and do this in an impactful way. It's why I think we would have to group them, right? Because a piece of this has to be on demographics. If you have students that are working with children, we have to talk about that. If you have students that are working specifically with IDD, we have to talk about that. And you have to make it a bit specific. So when we're talking about scaling up the curriculum, I would say there would have to be a section that says this has to be specific to communities in which your students are working, right? There has to be pieces there about demographics, culture, history, all of that would be my response to that. Does that make sense? Is that what you were asking? Yeah. Okay.
Anyone else? Comment, question?
Jess is raising your hand. Do you want to come up and talk up here real quick so you get?
I'm loud.
You are.
Can
Can you all hear Jess?
you
Dr.
hear me
Mann?
if I talk like this? Rick?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, we're on the same wavelength. So my question is, obviously demographic is of concern, like you were just saying, in terms of students' ability to understand the importance of the work related to their discipline or their specific site focus. But my question is in terms of student baseline. So was there a difference in demographics in terms of the Gamma participants versus the OT students? Like what year were they? What year are your scholars, right? So did you notice a difference in ability to reflect and meaning made based on where a student was at, either in their academic journey or their own personal sort of identity development? And do you think that there is a need to have a uniformity of that to move the needle on your suggested project
Right.
or model?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that I would have to double check, but I am 99.9% sure, because all the students disclosed this, they were all juniors or older. I think we had one sophomore, and everybody else, obviously the OTs were fourth year. I know that the GSS girls were older. I think we had one that was ending her sophomore year that within the community engagement scholars group. So I would say the study didn't show this. There's an argument on either side. Do you catch them when they come in the door as freshmen, or do you wait? I do think waiting, that upperclassmen, they were all upperclassmen for the most part, you're going to get probably a deeper level of reflection, because they're, that freshman year, you can get in the door on some level, but they're still just, from a critical reflection perspective, trying to form their own identity, as you said. In fact, one of the students who was an upperclassman spoke at length on her questionnaire about this was an experience in really forming her own identity, and she thought she had a solid sense of that, and she didn't. And that was woven in her experience. So I think that age plays a little bit of a difference there. I think that you can come in the door when they get here and say, this is important from what I can gather from the study and what my experience tells me. You're better off waiting a little bit before you get into the heavier stuff. So maybe the answer is then a thing that is scaled, that there's a front door that you come in, and that's the maybe the more base level stuff, just to try to equal out that baseline, because we know kids are coming in all over the place. I mean, not just with their own power, privilege, and demographics, but really even what they know about this stuff are coming in all over the place. So if we create sort of a series of front door programs, right, base level, where we can sort of hopefully equal out that baseline before we launch into the really deep stuff. But yeah, I would say that this group showed that it was definitely older students. And I would say that resonates with what I know as well.
Thank you.
Luci-Jo, I just have a comment. I am so excited to be able to be here and watch this with you remotely. And I'm going to have to run here in a second, but I have no doubt that you will be Dr. Luci-Jo very soon. Thank you for everything you've done for our cohort. You really were, and many times, the glue that held it together. The only time I can say that I was the glue that helped you was maybe in stats, but I have a lot of tremendous respect for you. I think a lot of what you talked about today, I experienced in our cohort, and there are a lot of things that I think of differently now because of conversations we had in our classes, but particularly conversations that you and I engaged in. And so thank you so much for not just, I think the greatest thing about this program, and in particular your dissertation, is it's not just a study, it's not just your research, it's what you live, and it's what you do, and it's how you go about everything in your life. And so I appreciate everything you've meant to each one of us, and especially to me, and how you live everything you talked about today. So congratulations. I've got to run here, but thank you again.
Thanks, Robert.
Thank you, Dr. Freed. Takes one to know one. Anyone else? Deborah?
Luci-Jo, I don't think you know me, but I'm in the 2022 cohort. And one, congratulations.
Not there yet.
Very,
Stop
you got
piecing
through the
together.
present. You got through the presentation part. You got through the writing part. That's enough. Congratulations right there. So, but I just want to say I appreciate your enthusiasm and your energy during the presentation. I think that's something definitely for me to keep in mind when I get to that point. And I also appreciate your candor around those moments where you just feel like giving up, because I've had a couple of those moments in the past couple weeks where it's like I'm done. So thank you for giving me hope. And I just wish you all the best. I have to run to a meeting, so fingers crossed. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Anyone else? Because we're right at the end of our time here. Okay, if I hear no more people who want to comment, I know that Darlene can move us to a private room, so the committee's going to leave.
Okay.
She's going to beam us up, Scotty, and we'll be back.
All right.
All right. Well, she's gonna hang out.
Feel free to talk amongst yourselves while we're gone.
We're waiting for you to leave.
My mom in, so we're gonna talk.
Take a minute.
Okay. I'm gonna turn the volume down. They just went into a different room, and I think it'll be, I don't know, how long is it?
10 minutes.
10 minutes? It's 10 minutes. Do you want me to hang, or do you want me to, how long was the last one?
It's not long.
It's not long.
Okay.
I would say 5 and 10.
Do you want me to call you? So now that it's right there and you have a warning. I know. Do you want me, well, they just left to go deliberate whatever that part is. So do you want me to call you guys back and when they come back in, now that I know you're sitting right there waiting? Okay, I love you. I'll be back.
Luci-Jo. LJ, how
Hi.
you doing? I apologize. I had to jump on and off for a couple of other issues that just came up. But I did catch a good 85% of what you said. And unless you screwed up in that other 15%,
You never know.
that was terrific. That was a great presentation. And I really did appreciate your comments about, reviewing and landing on, as you put it, the continua. And yeah, it's kind of like that. Chase and I are talking it too, right, Chase? We're still on?
Chase is there. He's serving barbecue sandwiches right now. I will tell you right now. He's listening and he's working cops and chefs on campus.
Well, he better, because we've got a meeting at 2
So,
o'clock. Anyway.
Yep, we're still good. We're still good.
I
I'm
told
here.
you. But more importantly, is there barbecue left?
Ah, okay.
Yes. Yes. There's plenty.
Okay.
We got you. We got you. We got you.
Okay. Yeah, you work. Okay. I see. Yeah, you're working okay. So, but one of the things I was thinking about is kind of arriving at an organizing framework that is yours based on what you have read. And Chase has like a Venn diagram that's sort of operating for him in organizing the literature. But you got to review some literature and you got to think about it and experiment with organization for a while. And that's not easy. But, I'm thinking that as it would be nice to maybe pull together some folks who can speak authoritatively to what that felt like and what it feels like. And I think that's why Dr. Moss wanted to ask you that question for some of our the colleagues that are following you in the program. So yeah, I thought that was terrific.
Funny you said that about the Venn diagram, because I think I had 75 versions of Venn diagrams. Because everything we had seen was some sort of like bubbles stuck together or like bubbles with satellite bubbles. And
Yep.
I mean, the amount of scrap papers that I was like, that's not it, that's not it, that's not
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And I was literally sketching out, they're here and we want them to be here. And I was like, that's a continuum. We can put people on a continuum. So
Yeah, well, that certainly worked in terms of, you know, being able to frame the study to render the account of this work.
yeah,
And you know, that's a powerful statement that says, look, this is it's not just a matter of conceptual change, although I think there's some real interesting work to be done on that. There's some very interesting work that's been done in terms of STEM education, and what conceptual change means in the context of beliefs. So it's a, you know, it's a complicated or complex, I should say, relationship. But this is really an important kind of change. This is a learning outcome. You know, as I think about, I mean, one of the things we talk about self-efficacy a lot in education, right? But and that's understood to be some sort of self-perception and Bandura and Pajares and, you know, all those folks. But it's also it's a something that people learn. It's a learning outcome. And if we can figure ways to help people become more efficacious in various kinds of contexts, then those are learning outcomes. And I think you're on to, you know, that's what you got me thinking about as I was listening to you, that you're talking about what could be a sort of life-changing learning outcome for college students, and it deserves the attention.
Something like a civic metanoia, but metanoia coming from ministry roots is always what we're going for, right? Like we're always looking for a change of heart, like a literal turning of heart. And that kind of, you know, speaks back definitely to my ministry roots, but I think there's something to be said there about a civic metanoia, right? An engagement metanoia. So, speaking of my ministry, oh, somebody in the room, sorry, what were you saying?
This is the non-scholarly part. I'm sitting here and thinking, and the spirit of terrorism is playing in my head.
Right.
We go to a people.
Right. We go to a people not primarily to accomplish a task. Right. This whole thing, and nobody's going to pick that up in the room but Deb, but the whole thing is just like dripping with spirit and ethos. Right. You know, that whole idea of walking with and going to a people not primarily to accomplish a task, rather to be with them, love them, share our faith with them. At the heart of our relationship is trust, respect, and love, right? That's, you know, that's good stuff. Yep, I love the spirit and ethos from Maynooth. That's my favorite doc.
To be in solidarity with.
Right.
That's the, yeah. As I was actually quoting from their chapter. But earlier, you know, 20 something or other, that what's it like to be a Spiritan, or to be spirited, I guess. And I had a great conversation with, well, a lot of Spiritans, but the first question I had to ask many years ago is, what the heck is a charism? Can you explain that to me?
Right. I don't know. I would just like pitch that word as Catholics, because every time I do a presentation, I have to start by saying, so this is what the word charism means. It's a fancy word for ethos, but only Catholics use it, right? Like it's, and not even only Catholic, like only Catholic orders of nuns and priests and brothers use it. That's it. Yes. It's like a special word we invented, because Sacrarium wasn't enough for word invention for us. We needed more fun words to say.
Yep. Well, when Father Nace told me it was the gift God gave the Spiritans, that was good. I was good with that.
Yep, that's good.
And he explained that gift was to hear the Holy Spirit, but that the only way to do that was through the people, and therefore you have to be in solidarity with the people.
We're actually rolling up on the 150th anniversary of the Spiritans in the U.S. in 2021, and we were talking about themes, catch lines essentially for the anniversary celebration, and solidarity and walking with, and the margins kept coming up repeatedly.
Yeah.
And trying to figure out a way, you know, to reflect the idea that it's not the work that the Spiritans did that made them unique, it was the way in which they did it.
Yep.
And how do you reflect that in a tagline, which is a little more challenging, but
Yeah.
that's kind of what it was. So
Well, I was also thinking of, you get the dissertation done, whatever revisions, get this baby done, graduate in May, right? Okay. Yeah. ETD by all of that. And then we got to start thinking about how you make this work public, how you publish it. And one of the things that I'm thinking about is certainly this could be a series around, teaching. What's Norm and I just did a CTE thing. I can't remember what it is. Spirits and pedagogy or something like that. But my gosh, you're right. This does drip with that.
yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah,
This
don't
would-
tell it though, because I'm not writing anything but a grocery list or an email until the other side of Christmas. I gotta tell you.
Yeah.
Like that's not a thing that's happening.
Yeah. That's what everybody says.
No, but really, it's like yes.
Yeah, they always
I've
say
seen
no,
it.
but really too. Yeah, I know. Well, but and you deserve a break.
Yeah,
But-
I'm all for the break.
Yeah, but because this is your passion, Luci-Jo, because this is what you do, you're gonna feel the obligation to and be ready to
No, I mean I genuinely
make this
will
public.
at some point. It's just this exact like people said. Jess said something about writing like a month and a half ago, and I was like, "Go away! I can't even." Like, oh my god, no! Like I have to go home and fix the numbers on my table of contents this weekend, and I will drag myself like a petulant child into the room with the computer to do that because I'm gonna be like, this is gonna be the worst. So I think it's just in the moment we are in. In the moment we are in, I can't really think about that in this exact moment. But Debbie, do you
I'm not asking you to think about it. I'm just sharing that this is work that is worth making public. That's my claim. That's all I'm going to say.
I agree, and there's not enough of it out there. I mean, two of the people in my references that made the slide were in the room, so like that, and it wasn't just because I love them, which I do, but it was because like there's not a ton of people writing on this at all,
Mm-hmm.
in any aspect. I mean, you hit points where I guess everybody does it with their literature review a little bit, but where it's not that you're reaching, but you're like, this is a compassion study on high school students, college students in Australia, I'll take it. Like, there's just not a lot out there, particularly around co-curricular engagement. Co-curricular engagement is just like the unloved child of the community engagement family.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're a member of NASPA, nobody thinks it's worth writing about, really, in a critical way, unless you're looking at personal development of the student. But nothing I found really spoke, exceptions around what Lori Pompa is doing, and she doesn't write a lot, but what she's doing, like there's co-curricular aspects of that, but Lori Pompa's published like 5 articles. Do you know what I mean? Like she's not even writing about her stuff.
Yeah.
And so that's a problem.
Yeah.
But there's just not any girth to the body of literature saying co-curricular community engagement can be a rich experience. Yes, is curricular and community engagement a rich experience? Absolutely. Can you transfer that knowledge outside of the classroom and layer it into other things? Not massive things like Bonner Scholars Program, which is amazing, but like not everybody's going to be a Bonner Scholars campus. But everybody should be able to do this for their student leaders, right? These are things at Catholic universities that can be woven into the faith that does justice. I mean, are we coming? I saw.
Yeah,
Yep,
call him.
Hold on, I gotta come on.
She locked out. If you
She locked out.
push it. Okay.
Hold on, nobody talk. The one thing on the phone.
So bossy.
Okay.
I love it.
Oh, it's echoing, isn't it? I'm sorry. Why am I not muted? Okay. Oh, it's you. Okay. There was a mute problem. Okay, hold on. Wait. Okay.
that your mom?
I don't know how to. There we go.
It is my honor and privilege as the chair of your dissertation to be the first one to call you Dr. Luci-Jo DiMaggio. Congratulations, Luci-Jo.
Thank you. There's crying on the phone right now. It's kind of funny. I'm like, wow, I actually think they're both crying. I mean, I can't, no, there I am. There I am. Okay. So I'm going to put like this so you guys can stay. Thank you. I don't know what happened now. I'm super excited.
Well, what
I really want to get
say
my
is,
barbecue sandwich that Jason's selling.
I want to congratulate your family. I want to congratulate your husband. You know, it takes a village to get a doctorate. And I think tonight you can celebrate. The committee was impressed with your work. We have a few small suggestions to make it stronger, statements that we want to see you add. You and I will talk about that. It's not much, but it's, you know, I've always told you, Luci-Jo, as the cousin of a jeweler, you can always polish a diamond. So congratulations, doctor. We'll polish you up in the days to come. But now, do you have anything else you want to say? And if anyone else wants to say anything, but you're a doctor, baby.
Woo, that's weird. Just thank you. Thank you for the people that were able to make it onto the call. Thank you. Thank you to my committee. Am I allowed to pause and thank my committee for a second? Because as Dr. Moss will tell you, you can put a $20 bill in your dissertation. And the reason you do that is because if you ever run out of money, you can go back in 10 years, it's still there because nobody's going to read it. And so nobody's going to see the thanks that I put to my committee in that dissertation. But I want to say, wait, I got to get to where's my view so I can see humans. Hold on. Now I can see my humans. Okay. Dr. Generette, I don't know if you read this part, but I did not forget this. I think I actually followed Dr. Generette like a puppy out of class and being like, and I had 37 different questions about writing, and I don't know how to do this work, and I don't know what I want to do with this work. And she literally like wheeled on me like only a mother can. It was like, Luci-Jo, before you figure out what you're going to write, you have to figure out what you want to be when you grow up. And I was like, she's right. And I kept that, like, what is this leading to, right? Like, there's a lot to write if it's not going to lead to the next thing, if it's not going to shape the next thing. So thank you for doing that and being that person. And sometimes, you know, a professor needs to talk to like a professor, and sometimes professors need to turn on you like your mama and turn and be like, this is what has to happen next. And I genuinely appreciated that. Dr. Moss, thank you for, I would say, brutal honesty, but that's good. I like brutal honesty in my life. And there's no other person that could have dragged me through, particularly the 17 times I wanted to quit. And you kept saying over and over, and you would say like, did you write this weekend? Yes, I did. Okay, this isn't good. You need a good edit. Like, you have to go back and do this. And then I would come back and she'd be like, this is great. This is great. And I love that. I love that we had a relationship. I love that we had a relationship where you could tell me, this isn't your best work, and you know you can do better. And this is, now we're getting there. And I was so appreciative of that. And so Lena, who's in the room, I don't know who would know this. Lena gave me my first classroom when I said I don't want it, and she said, you're gonna take it. And I really was super nervous about teaching students anything. I hadn't done that. I had been in ministry, and ministry is very different. And it's a lot of talking and just sharing your thoughts, and it's not conveying information. And so thank you when I did not necessarily have faith in myself to take that classroom and giving me that classroom. And I think what I said to you, if I remember correctly, is I don't want to take it because one day whoever comes after you is going to take it away from me and I'll be crushed. So thank you, Jess, who's also in the room, for not taking that exact classroom away from me. I still have that beautiful little classroom in the basement of 20 Chatham that I get to use every year, and I so appreciate that. Thank you to anybody that was able to make it on this. My husband is listening, and he's probably like on a work call and doing 10 other things at once right now. But thank you, Bubba, for making it on. And the kids are virtual today. So and we have a lab puppy, so he's got a lot going on and managed to log in with Jason's iPhone. Thank you, guys. I'm just really appreciative and cannot believe that it's finally done. And I don't even have words. I'm ready to like take a nap on the floor if it weren't for the barbecue sandwiches happening on A-Walk. That's the only thing motivating me. I think it just wants to stay cool. So that's all I got.
Connie, I have a request.
Sure.
I need something. I need one more thing.
Okay.
Luci-Jo.
Yeah.
I would like, if you could please, introduce yourself in the way that you have earned now to us today. Good afternoon. I am Dr. Luci-Jo DiMaggio, an expert in my practice and field. Please.
I don't think I can do that because I don't want to.
Do it.
That was what actually writing was like.
Do it.
I am Dr. Luci-Jo DiMaggio, an expert in my field. Wow, that felt really weird. And
The three of us feel strongly that you need to own that, because that is absolutely who you are. It's not all defining, but you are a doctor, you are an expert in your practice.
okay, we didn't even get emotional, people.
Too late.
Too late. I wasn't banking on that.
Well, I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank Luci-Jo's family, Dr. DiMaggio. We're very proud of you. Please tell your children how proud we are of them. I know so many times when we met, they were in the background doing their work, making their lunches, and you never skipped being a great MOM just because you were pursuing your EDD. And I really admire that about you. So celebrate, have a great time, and thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Lena. It's great to see you.
Bye, Rick.